before we start, I just want to mention a few things. First, I don't have a script. Second, please don't hate Fishstick. His video is actually pretty well made. With that being said, Fishstick does end up repeating himself a bit towards the end, so I've kind of jumped things around to try and merge his arguments together so that I'm not repeating myself too much. If I'm not trying to misrepresent Fish, though, if you want to watch his video, I'll link to it in the description. Lastly, I'm biased. I have 4,600 hours on TF2 and 1,600 on Spy, most of which as Gun Spy. And very, very lastly, the first third of this video was recorded while I was very sleep deprived, so please forgive the less than stellar voice recording.
Valve publishes a blog post detailing some balance changes they're planning out for the next major update, and among them is a prospective nerf to the Ambassador. Now, a lot of people were really surprised by this. After all, no one ever complained about the Ambassador. It was never banned in any competitive format. It was fine, wasn't it? Well, I thought so too, but looking back on it, even though no one really complained or brought it up before the proposed nerf, that doesn't mean it wasn't in a state that warranted the nerf. I mean, hell, a lot of people didn't complain about random crits for a very long time. That doesn't mean they haven't been terrible. It's just that sometimes people need a little push to think about game balance.
So first, I want to talk to you all about the authority bias. In short, it's the it's a bias that people who have authority are more likely to be correct or to have done their own research or basically hand wave away the initial doubts that you would come to when something is explained or told to you by an authority figure. And believe it or not, Valve is an authority when it comes to their games. So for many people, not everyone, but many people, the authority bias is going to largely impact how they view things they don't have strong opinions already formed about. So, for example, any weapon they don't really care about, they'll just trust Valve's word about that weapon. Whether that's a weapon like, say, the base jumper that also got nerfed, or the Ambassador, a weapon only very few players really, enjoyed playing. Even a lot of spies don't really like the Ambassador that much. They want to play Kunai, Trick Stabby McGee. It's not a surprise that a lot of players were convinced by Valve's argument that the Ambassador was problematic, even if, which we'll get to later, that the Ambassador reasoning for the Ambassador nerf was not as sound as Valve wishes it was.
In the patch notes, the TF team say that when you're killed by a headshot from across the map, you expect to see a sniper. A lot of people simply interpreted this as Sniper is the only class who gets to kill people from long distances. Spy should not be able to do this because he is not Sniper. Well, no, not really.
Guess what happens next?
Other classes have long-range options, even long-range burst damage options that deal similar damage to the Ambassador. The real issue came from one important unmentioned factor: counterplay.
So in this clip, FishStickOnAStick states why the Ambassador was nerfed by Valve, according to Valve, but then extrapolates that into beyond what Valve actually said about the weapon, because Valve's reasoning simply doesn't add up, and most people can see that. Even FishStick here sees that with his clip of the long-range flare gun spam taking out a couple engineers. But if we look at the Jungle Inferno patch notes for the reserve shooter, it specifically mentions the reserve shooter being too strong due to the other mechanics of the Pyro class, namely Air Blast. But we don't see that with the Ambassador. There is no mention of cloak or escape or anything. It just straight up says that long-range kills are the domain of sniper, and that the spy shouldn't be able to do that. As for Fishsticks' issue with counterplay, or in his opinion lack thereof, we'll get to that as he gives some examples.
Getting killed by a sniper is kind of like getting killed by a sentry. There's only a few places on a well-designed map where he can remain effective for an extended period of time. If a sniper gets a cheeky kill on you from an area you weren't expecting, it's easy to call him out, and his slow movement speed along with his lack of options in close range mean he's not going to last very long. Much like a sentry in a weird spot that you could never see coming. Sure, it'll kill you once, but only once, and the sniper is putting himself at great risk to get himself out of an optimal position for what ends up being one cheeky kill. This, along with his notorious tunnel vision, lack of movement mechanics outside of basic walking and jumping, and his reliance on player precision, give many classes the ability to easily counter him once they know he's there. However, then you apply that same principle to Spy, and things change. This is for several reasons. For starters, no tunnel vision. Spy gets to maintain a full view of the battlefield while being able to snipe, and unlike the Classic, which shares this ability, he can perform a headshot instantly and while keeping full mobility.
So for these clips, Fishstick's biggest issue seems to boil down to counterplay, as sniper is quite limited when he's sniping. But I don't think Fishstick realizes these aren't buffs to Spy or any class when they're fighting long range, but specifically nerfs to Sniper, because the TF2 devs knew that Sniper had a very high potential to be dominating in the game's meta. So very early on they put in a lot of limitations for Sniper. He must be scoped in to get a headshot. He moves slowly while scoped in. He can't fire instantly after scoping in. These are limitations to try and stop Sniper from just running around the map like a pyro or a scout and just headshotting people like you see some people pull off in other games. Furthermore, Fishstick doesn't seem to realize that other classes, such as pyros spamming flares at engineer, also don't have limited vision and limited mobility, just like Spy does.
Spy gets to maintain a full view of the battlefield while being able to snipe, no tunnel vision, and while keeping full mobility.
Lastly, I want to mention that even though I don't want this, the Ambassador, if it was never nerfed, would be buffed by having a scope. It would make the weapon a lot easier to aim, because scoping makes hitboxes far larger. For reference, here is a picture scoped and unscoped. Do you see how much bigger the hitboxes are while scoped? Do you see how that could make it easier to hit hitboxes?
He can also see the health of enemy players, meaning it's easy to get a kill on an injured player anywhere across the map as long as he knows they're within killing range, even if he hasn't seen them fight or damage them himself.
Compared to Sniper, where you don't need to see people's health because you know you'll one-shot them if they're a light class or even a medic, and two-shot them if they're anything but an overhealed heavy.
And finally, he can disguise and cloak or feign death to effectively put himself at any position on the map, at any time, to get any kills he wanted, at any range, and get away with it afterwards at basically no cost to himself.
We have already established that other classes have the capability to do long-range damage. However, you seem to be stuck on the fact that Spy can cloak and disguise. You fail to mention that other classes have other ways to get around the map. I could just as easily make a case that the soldier is too good at sniping because he can Rock could jump away at the first sign of danger, or while shooting charged cowmangler shots into some choke point from long range, leaving him an untouchable sniper.
And at close range, it's very uncommon for him to get away with a headshot. Even the best snipers have a hard time doing this reliably. There's a reason really good snipers put those clips in their frag montages. It's because it's fucking impressive.
I also just want to add here that just like it's impressive for snipers to get close range headshots, and that's why you see them in frag movies, the same is true of ambassador spies getting long range headshots, which is also why you see them in frag movies.
With all this in mind, it's easy to see why ambassador hackers were just about as common as regular sniper hackers back in the day.
Oh my god, the word about is doing some fucking legwork there, isn't it?
Jokes aside, I don't know how many hackers are in whatever region you play in, but at least in my region, Australia, no, I played back, I played before Jungle Inferno, I played before the nerf, and no, ambassador hackers were nowhere near as common as snipers.
A lot of people will tell me that I'm objectively wrong, that this woolen sleevelet video proves that the ambassador is objectively worse than the revolver because the DPS is worse unless you're perfectly accurate with all your headshots. I'm fully aware of this video, and I have some contention with it. First of all, according to this video, the ambassador has never been worth using in any range outside of sniper range. And of course that's just not true. Take a look at any spy frag montage movies from before 2017. And then consider suicide. You'll see that plenty of shots that these spies make are well within the boundaries that the current ambassador is effective in. Spy players make it out to be that the only way you can get utility out of dealing 102 damage to someone is if you're not even in a fight to begin with and you're on the other side of the map, when that's just not the case. Your effective range as a spy with your insta-kill weapon is breathing down the enemy's necks, but because you can't headshot people from across the map, now the function is useless and not worth practicing in?
There seems to be a misunderstanding here about how strong the revolver is compared to the ambassador. The revolver is a very good weapon, it is a very strong weapon, it does a lot of damage, and as per Woolen's video, even if you're hitting 100% headshots, your kill times are going to be more or less identical at close range. Sometimes they're even going to be better than the stock revolver at close range. And that's assuming we can get every single headshot, which just isn't realistic, not even slightly. You also seem to have an issue with the ambassador being used at close range, saying the weapon has never been worth using at any range outside of sniper range. And if you compare it to the stock revolver, this is indeed true. Again, that's just how strong the stock revolver is. If you are implying, however, that the ambassador has always been weak at close range and still is weak at close range, this is untrue, and this would be a misunderstanding of how people use the ambassador. People use the ambassador at close range, yes, but they used it knowing that they were worse off than the stock revolver at close range. Then, when they were at long range, it gave them that upside of having that as a viable, if hard to pull off, option at long range, which is not possible anymore. So the upside of the weapon, situationally being worse at close range, or situationally being better at long range, has been removed. Now it is just situationally worse at close range.
If anything, it's a great idea to keep the ambassador out when you're just moving around the map because, oh shit, there's a random person you had no idea was going to be around that corner because how could you possibly have accounted for that while playing this stupid fucking luck-based class? But he's at low enough health that you can just slug him and be on your merry way.
Carrying any weapon as you run around a corner can be useful, whether it's the stock revolver for a consistent 50-60 damage, as opposed to the chance for 102, whether it's the knife so you can get a cheeky corner stab as you run around the corner, which many knife spies do advise you do, as you can get some fun kills that way, or whether it's the knife just for being able to butter knife someone who's low enough health, because getting a melee attack is relatively easy. This isn't an advantage the ambassador has, it's just close range combat.
The DPS on the ambassador is of course going to be worse than the stock revolver unless you're good with your headshot.
You don't need to be just good with your headshots, you need to be nigh perfect with your headshots in order to do the same DPS as the stock revolver.
It's a weapon that encourages precision for burst damage instead of damage over time. I wonder where I've seen this design philosophy in TF2 before. Now, I don't mean to present this disingenuously because, yes, the flare gun and crossbow obviously work just as well, if not better at long range than close range, and are substantially better at long range than their counterparts. However, this design philosophy also extends to the direct hit, the Dragon's Fury, the loose cannon, the Frontier Justice, and even the Market Gardener to a certain extent, all close range options. So this design philosophy is not unheard of, and I think you'll have a hard time convincing a lot of players that these weapons are useless.
There's a lot that goes into a weapon to determine how good or bad or useful or useless it is, more than just its general design philosophy. For example, the shotgun is a high damage burst firing weapon, and yet on heavy, you never use the shotgun. You're always carrying a lunchbox item, not unless you're purposely running Fat Scout or you don't have a lunchbox item yet unlocked because you're new.
If you're playing Spy in the first place, why the hell do you care about DPS? You're a fucking pick class.
So I think there's a misunderstanding regarding the purpose of the video. The purpose of the video isn't to show the Ambassador as being a worse pick revolver. It's showing that the Ambassador is worse at gunplay in general, whether it's self-defense or just normal gun spy running up and shooting people type gunplay. The Ambassador is worse in most situations.
If you've ever tried to backstab someone, but fucked up because your internet is literally too good for you to be playing Spy, so you only do 40 damage, would you like to take your chances gunning down that pissed off enemy in melee range 2 more times? Or would you rather give him what he fucking deserves? Or better yet, maybe you're coming up on a potential backstab target, and you see someone at just under 100 health right next to them. You go for the backstab, and just as you've been noticed, you whip out the Ambassador and slug the other guy. 2 for 1 pick. Considering how often people fall into Spy syndrome where they might get 1 kill per life, being able to potentially secure 2 kills, or at the very least ensure they'll get the target they're going for, is a massive bonus. So if you have an opportunity to take a high value target out in 1 shot from mid-range instead of 2 or 3 at close range, why wouldn't you take that? I'll take my chances at reliably 2-shotting a pyro over whittling him down with my revolver any day. To use it while you're retreating after a backstab or while you happen to run into an injured enemy. If you're precise, you can easily take out power classes in a reasonable amount of time from a decent range, and light classes are an easy 2-tap as long as you land a single headshot.
So another thing I want to talk about regarding the Ambassador is consistency and assumptions. You will find a lot of the time when people talk about the Ambassador, they kind of just assume you get the headshot. They assume that you will deal that 102 damage, when as someone who has 1600 hours in the class, you miss headshots. You miss a lot of headshots. You will have good aim days where you feel like a god, and even on those days you will miss a lot of headshots. Conversely, the stock revolver, as it does not require such aiming prowess to hit consistent headshots, it will more consistently be useful and in self-defense and in close range. Unfortunately though, humans, not just you and me, but all humans, are not very good at understanding statistics and understanding averages, and we remember the highs and lows, we don't remember the average.
When you're a spy, every second you're out of cloak or disguise in enemy territory is a gamble on your own life.
Yes, it is a gamble on your life. That's why the stock revolver, which I think we can both agree is better at close range, since you keep mentioning mid-range for the Ambassador, is such a good item.
The old Ambassador was incredibly powerful because it effectively made Spy's main backstabbing function much more secondary to just shooting people. Why do you need to play in a way that's antithetical to Spy's playstyle in order to accomplish your goals with this weapon?
What is and isn't a valid playstyle is obviously going to be quite subjective. Personally, I think having more playstyles is a good thing, as it allows more people to enjoy the game, or for people to try out various different parts of the game, for people who enjoy changing things up. Even if you're a spy player, being able to switch between playing Knife Spy, where you use the invis and you sneak around, or gun spy, where you focus on shooting people, or if you're good enough at it, trick stab spy, where you don't worry about being stealthy and just run through a team of enemies getting trick stab after trick stab. Each of these is, a valid way of playing the, spy, and the fact that people can play them is a good thing. So whether something can be considered a valid playstyle is a bad question. If anything, it should be, why shouldn't Gunspy be a valid playstyle?
What's also nice about the Ambassador compared to sniper rifles is that if people are aware of you as sniper, they're going to try and move unpredictably in order to dodge your shots. But if people are aware of you as a spy, you're usually just kind of dead. So if you're alive, then the enemy is almost certainly unaware of you. And that automatically puts you at an advantage over them because they have no idea you're even aiming at them to begin with. And they're not going to adjust their movements accordingly. Most people tend to move predictably when they think they're in a position of safety, or they might not even move at all, securing you easy headshots on enemies that you normally wouldn't be able to backstab.
Whilst it is true that in theory the ability to cloak lets you go anywhere on the map and therefore shoot anyone from anywhere on the map, actually getting to some areas even with cloak can be quite hard. Some choke points are quite hard to get through with the Invis Watch or the Cloak and Dagger due to the presence of spam. Some areas will also be hard to get to simply due to too many enemies going through that area or pirates spy checking. On top of that, even if you could get anywhere, you wouldn't want to. You'd want to get to an area that helps you get as close as possible to make head hitboxes bigger, whilst also giving you an easy escape route and making it hard for enemies to fight back from. So whilst in theory, yes, you can snipe from any angle and you can, be from any angle, which allows you to always get the surprise, in truth, you're regularly using the same 2-3 areas, just like a sniper regularly snipes in the same 2-3 areas. The difference being that you're largely doing it from the flank and from behind, as opposed to from in front of the enemies and your team's backline.
Speaking of sniper, so many people like to think that the Razorback is this automatic gotcha for saying that spy is meant to be sniper's counter, as if that totally invalidates the point, when you can just fucking... I mean, Jesus Christ, I know they nerfed it, but do people just forget this thing even exists?
So the thing people need to understand about the Razorback is the strength with the Razorback isn't the inability to stab the sniper, it's the inability to stab the sniper while he's also surrounded by all of his team, making him impossible to gun down as well. The Ambassador was a somewhat half-decent counter to this, because you could snipe him from some weird angle, but as you can no longer deal any long-range damage with the weapon, it is no longer a proper counter to the Razorback. Yes, it does allow you to two-shot Razorback snipers, but it's actually pretty rare where you can't just three-shot them with the other revolvers.
Using the Ambassador has gotten me out of so many bad scrapes because the game does not take place in a vacuum. Looking at numbers and DPS alone doesn't always cut it. A lot of the time, the people who I run into are already hurt to some extent because they're on the back line retreating from enemy fire, and you're also an enemy backline specialist. And they see Spy as a free pick anyway because while most classes can do 100 damage with one shot, I can only do 60. Unless, of course, I click on their heads, evening the playing field.
So I did mention earlier the idea that people just assume you get the headshot. 102 damage is nothing to scoff at, of course, but it is far harder to hit that 102 headshot over, say, the scout with the scattergun or soldier with the rocket launcher as you're running around the back lines. Furthermore, I want to point out that whilst yes, the stock revolver does 60, you can't just have a look at how much damage something does in a single shot to say how powerful or strong it is. The minigun is a perfect example here. It's one of the highest DPS weapons in the game, and yet the most it does on damage is 13.5 according to the wiki.
It's a toned-down version of what the Ambassador was already good at that actually enables counterplay, making it more fair for the enemy to fight. You can still see enemy health to easily pick out low health targets. You can still get away easily after a headshot, and it increases your insta-kill range beyond that of your knife. But it's at the risk of your own skill as a player failing, because now you just don't have the safety net of long range on top of your other safety nets.
Unfortunately, as this video progresses, I've found that FishStickOnAStick begins to repeat himself a bit. I've already talked about counterplay for Spy at long range, along with how it's more of a nerf for Sniper than a buff for any other class. I've also talked about how other classes have very similar potential, such as a Cowmangler Soldier being able to shoot from long range with charged shots, and then rocket jumping away at the first sign of danger.
And the fact that they're so willing to underestimate you makes them easier targets to hit because they're not going to try to juke you out as much. In fact, people underestimating you is one of the best parts about this weapon. So many people think it's beneficial or even necessary to engage you in a fight and focus the hell out of you, and all it does is get them killed.
I just want to add here that nothing FishStick has said here is strictly untrue, but that doesn't really make any arguments for or against the ambassador. If people are undervaluing an item and you're taking advantage of that, as people are not expecting an item to be as strong as it is, then that is on them, but it doesn't really change anything regarding balance or how a weapon should be balanced or anything like that.
So many potential picks that would normally be just out of your range are now totally feasible, and for an assassin character, that's a great utility that shouldn't be underestimated. You don't have to go into a sentry's firing range in order to get certain kills now, or too close to a puppy guarding pyro, and you don't need to be precise with every single one of your revolver shots as long as you hit 1 or 2 headshots, which with some practice is more than reasonable.
So I think it's worth mentioning here that whilst yes, the ambassador does let you do more damage at long range, though long range being less than 1200 hammer units than your knife or the stock revolver, 54 damage really isn't enough to be reliably getting any kills. For reference, the soldier's rocket launcher does 45 at long range on a direct, or if you're using the direct hit, it's roughly 60 damage, which is more than the ambassador's. So whilst yes, you are in a way extending your range, you're not extending your range with enough damage to reliably get kills. It's also worth mentioning is, in order to actually get any kills with 54 damage, you often have to hit 3 different headshots, which is very impressive. Even the best players will struggle to pull that off.
Even the body shot damage isn't so bad that I consider it a massive detriment. If it was, then I'd have a lot fewer complaints about the fucking Diamondback.
So FishStickOnAStick is half right here. The ambassador's slower firing speed and reduced damage on body shot are noticeable, but not noticeable to the point of being not worth using. Tip I would give to any new spy using the ambassador is don't be afraid to body shot. However, it is worth noting that the slower firing speed means that you are now firing slower than other classes, which means that you can't reliably out-DM them just by holding your mouse down and getting 2-3 body shots, assuming that they can also hit their shots on you. The reduced damage also means that where you're doing 51 at point blank, the stock revolver is doing 60, or when the stock revolver is doing 50, you're doing closer to 40. That 10 damage doesn't seem like a lot, but it does mean that you're not hitting certain damage thresholds quickly enough from various different ranges. So it's more impactful than you would realize, but it's also less impactful than some people would make it out to be.
The thing that interests me is that it seems like spy players aren't upset that it's worse than stock, or even just a flat-out bad weapon. They're upset because it's not better than stock anymore. It's no longer a direct upgrade in all situations. It's actually a situational side grade like all unlocks, except medics for some reason, are meant to be.
So we've already been over how FishStickOnAStick has misunderstood just how good the stock revolver is, especially in close range as a either offense or self-defense tool, and we've already been over why due to assumptions. So I just think I will let this next clip play. It is a spy talk round table from roughly about 2015 about spies talking about Highlander competitively, talking about how good each revolver is, and the stock revolver versus the ambassador. So I'm hoping that if you don't trust me, maybe you'll trust some spies from before they even heard about a nerf possibly happening, talking about how the stock revolver was a viable competitively viable weapon to run and use.
Warning, this next clip has been severely edited down. You will find a link to the whole talk in the description.
I think the weapon choices lead us on to one big debate between the spies is revolver or ambassador.
Ambassador.
Long question. And never has an answer, apparently.
I don't know. I like the revolver. It does a lot of damage.
I find myself using the revolver on like King of the Hill maps because it's smaller and you can put out more damage.
I think the question in itself is a bit inherently flawed because both, like each gun, they serve different purposes. You know, the ambassador is focused around burst damage. You know, it's more like the knife. You know, you're looking to insta kill people or scare people. You know, that's what the ambi's about. And it's got like this really long range shot. It's not meant for getting up into people's faces. Whereas the revolver, it's more of a self-defense tool. You know, it's like if you fail to pick, a revolver's going to be helping you out much more than the ambassador because you don't have to worry about getting that really precise headshot. You can just go gun crazy and just try and hit 3 shots on someone, and that'll probably kill them.
I think what I like to think of is like the revolver is really good just like as an all-round DM tool, but the ambi is like even if you don't have really good aim with it, you can run it because sometimes it's really good even if you can't get the kill to at least cripple someone.
I think the question is, because we were just talking about when and why do you change watches, I think should more be asked when and why do you change guns. When I did play competitive, I used the revolver a lot because you can just 3-shot a medic, and what's better than that if you miss a stab? It's almost guaranteed every time if you've got good aim. I think the revolver's a better strength choice to actually pick someone at a more appropriate time.
I definitely agree. I don't think that spies should really be asking, is this better than this? I think they should be asking, is this better for this situation?
Yeah.
If you want to use the stock revolver because you prefer the average higher DPS, or hitting center mass shots is just easier than hitting headshots for you, then that's totally fine. I have no issue with that. I didn't make this video to undersell the stock revolver. It's actually really good, but so is the ambassador, and I don't think people give it the credit it deserves anymore. All I'm trying to get across is that I find the ambassador to be on similar footing to the revolver. And if you really don't think it's worth using anymore or not worth practicing in, then I just don't know what to tell you. I don't know, maybe it's the edgy sniper main in me talking, maybe it's the 5 keys I spent on this thing, but I kind of just feel bad for this gun. In the end though, if people are going to keep treating it like it's some kind of garbage joke weapon, then I don't mind being the one laughing in the end.
Unfortunately, as the video goes on, FishStickOnAStick does tend to repeat himself. We have already spoken about how the stock revolver is better than FishStick seems to get the credit for, even though he says here that the stock revolver is good, and I have no doubt that he believes that. I don't think he realizes just how good it is. I also want to clarify that comp-level spies fully believe that the stock revolver is just 100% better than the ambassador now.
And people undersell how far away you can still do respectable headshot damage with this thing. I understand that it can still feel pretty punishing, and the damage feeling more random at longer ranges doesn't help, but it's nowhere near as short as spy mains make it out to be.
Alright, here's a very nice graph made by VidBoy about the ambassador and how its damage is calculated at various ranges. It's a little subjective on how you want to define respectable, but considering that roughly the length of 2-foot bridge, you're hitting only 54 damage, and a couple steps further than that, you're suddenly hitting 18 damage on a headshot, I don't feel like it's as respectable as you might realize. Alright, thanks for watching the video. I hope it come across as too harsh or too mean. Overall, I think FishSticks' video is well made. Just like I said at the start of the video, unfortunately, it's not really correct.